Welcome to Psychology to Live By. Today's a Q&A with some quite in-the-moment people. Our topic is time. Our participants have watched the podcast In the Time series, which you can see or listen to at my website, drchris.life. I'll do a quick summary now of part 3, hypnosis, meditation and awe, before we go into our Q&A. Part 3 in this time series explored altered states of consciousness and their effects on time perception. We see that in everyday trance we can lose all track of time, such as when you're lost in thought or daydreaming. Hypnotic states alter time perception in various ways, especially when we think an experience was very short when in fact it was quite long. Curiously, our judgments of time duration in hypnosis vary if we're looking back retrospectively when we underestimate the time, or if we're judging in the moment where we overestimate. In meditation, time often seems to expand, probably because we're paying very close attention to the details and the complexity of moment-to-moment experience, and probably because we're more relaxed. Research has indicated that developing calm emotions, focusing with deep attention, and exposing ourselves to complex situations all tend to expand our perception of time. Meditation appears to be helpful in this regard, not only in the immediate experience, but in the way it generalizes to everyday life. As we become more mindful in all that we do, we're calmer, more attentive, and more engaged in the complexities that always surround us. And finally, in states of awe, time also slows down, again, probably because the perceptual experience is so rich and complex. Awe is potentially always around us, whether it be the moral beauty of others, collective effervescence or heightened group emotions, experiences with nature, music, visual design, spirituality and religion, and experiences concerning life and death, and finally experiences of epiphany or insight. So the potential for awe is constantly surrounding us. So a key takeaway in day-to-day life is to turn our attention to the details of things and to the always around us awe-inspiring. Alrighty, so now we turn to some people who are awe-inspiring, and that is my good friends, and they've watched and listened to the podcasts, and as always, I'm very, very interested in their experience of that and any questions and insights they've got. And I might, who am I going to put on the spot today? Let's see. I think Mr. Norwood, Chris. What's going on in that very active and interesting mind of yours?
A few things. There's where to start. The part that really hung out or stuck out to me was the around awe
Yeah.
at the end, and partly because I've noticed, at least in my own arc, a shift from, like, as a youth or younger person, where your expectation of how you might find awe is like, oh, it's in the external world, so to speak, where you just have to be in these. If you're not exposed to these situations, then you're not provided the opportunity to live in awe or recognize the awe. I'm not doing a great job of explaining this, but I got a point, I promise.
Yeah.
But a shift of responsibility internally allows you to actually see and identify awe in even the everyday.
Yeah.
Right. And so it actually can be everywhere around you, and you can find those moments of, like, of awe in what might have otherwise seemed mundane or routine or unremarkable, were you not looking for it.
Yeah.
And that conceptually to me was just like such a powerful, it actually lives within you to be able to create these experiences for yourself. And which, as it ties in here even further, allows you to you're also start to be in control of your ability to manipulate your perception of the passage of time. by taking that responsibility and looking for those things. I thought that whole concept is just so powerful and so meaningful that, you know, you as an individual actually can be put in the driver's seat a little bit of the way that you experienced it.
Beautiful. As you say, there's several ideas there, and my aging brain will be struggling to recall them, so I'll probably need your help. But a few thoughts. Yes, this idea that we have to go somewhere special in order to have the sense of awe is not right. I mean, of course, it's a great thing to do, to go into nature, or you know, to you know, go to an art gallery and to be awe-inspired by the works of a great master. But as you point out, awe is available all the time, and in the way you described it, Chris, you're emphasising the inner dimension. You know, that there's a way in which I can open myself to the awe-inspiring. And you know, for all of you with kids, you know, children, you see them awe-inspired on a daily basis because everything's new. They haven't got categories for a lot of things yet. So when they encounter something new, their whole consciousness is amazed by it, and you can almost see their neural nets forming up as they try to figure out how it fits into their framework. So one of the problems for us as we get older is we don't see things fresh like that. We see them through our conceptual frameworks, and so in other words, things look like they're just variations on the same old stuff, and so therein lies the secret, that by looking at closer and closer detail, by opening the mind, we begin to see that perhaps what we're seeing is not exactly what's there, that there's more there, right? And if you've, I think all of you would have, to varying degrees, experimented with hypnosis, not hypnosis, with meditation. And most people, when they start meditation, find it boring because there's nothing to pay attention to. What do you mean? The breathing or repeating a mantra. But of course, when people become more experienced in meditation, they begin to see that there is incredible, ever-expanding detail and newness in the perceptions of very, in inverted commas, mundane experience. Right. So that's one way. There's a wonderful book by Dasha Keltner, and it's called Awe. I think there's probably a subtitle, but I can't remember the subtitle. And from memory, he says there are 8 common sources of awe, and I outlined some of those in the intro, but I'm pretty sure my memory is correct here. He said the most common source of awe for people is other people. And particularly this kind of moral awe. You know, like I remember reading about Nelson Mandela and his, you know, being kept in solitude. And then when he was released, you know, he really drove that reconciliation process post-apartheid. And when I read about that, I just felt pretty overwhelmed, actually, that how a person could overcome such cruelty and such, like 26 years, I think it was, largely in solitary, and yet can have the wisdom. So that's awe-inspiring. And so there's people around us 24/7. You don't have to go anywhere. And again, we, you know, with our loved ones, we often are so caught up in our own mind, in our own concepts, our own thoughts, we don't see the awe-inspiring that's here, that's available every day. And in the work that you guys do, of course, I know you're close to, you know, in your musical artists, you're drawn by the awesome. It's a terrible way that word's been co-opted, isn't it? Awesome, but the awe-inspiring, and you want to get it out there. So yeah, it's a lot more prevalent, a lot more available than we think. Now, did I miss some of the things that you were? Okay, well,
The only other one would, yeah, well, I think we talked about is that like the ability for the person to kind of be in control of their own reaction to or availability to awe. But yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's really interesting. This may seem a bit odd, but what immediately came into my mind when you talked about that was the opposite, right? And I would say the opposite of that is depression, because when people are depressed, they see no possibility in life. They see no possibility in self. They feel sort of estranged from being able to. They feel helpless and hopeless and estranged from their experience. In other words, they have a powerfully negative, what we call external locus of control. Everything's just happening to them. There's nothing they can do. And what we're talking about is the opposite of that, right? It's finding the meaningful and the purposeful in everyday life. And in fact, Keltner's book that I referenced, he outlines a sort of vast repertoire of benefits that accrues to people when they proactively and deliberately seek awe. And it's just a question of remembering to, really. I've got a friend who's a psychologist who's really getting into this forest bathing. Have you guys heard of forest bathing? It comes from a Japanese tradition. It's a sort of meditative practice out in the wild, just in nature. It can be a local park or in your own garden, but the idea is that you're very, very mindfully paying attention to all the senses. And so there's studies happening around the world on nature connection, which is not the same thing as just spending time in nature. There doesn't appear to be the benefits if you just happen to be walking through a park every day, right? If your mind is not there, if it's off. So there's this intentionality. And remembering. It's like loving your beloved. You've got to remember to do it, and get out of your head. All right, that's wonderful. Who's next?
I don't mind jumping in, kind of just in the same vein of awe-inspiring. I think like what resonated with me was, in order to be awe-inspired, you really have to be in the present moment. And I feel like I've said this before, but like staying in the present moment is a constant practice. And for myself, not hypothesizing about what's to come, usually hypothesizing tragedy, how it's going to go sideways, but limiting distraction, which seems so obvious in the practice of being present. But I'm wondering if there's any other nuggets that you might share or advise on that can help remind folks of like how to bring themselves back into the present moment in order to welcome in, awe-inspiring situations.
I'm laughing because I'm just thinking about how hopeless I am at this.
Yeah.
But and how dedicated I am to it, and still hopeless. I know how important it is. But I'll do my best, given that very important caveat. Look, I think there is a sense in which sometimes we are, relatively speaking, we are a little more awake, and we might be at work or walking around town or whatever. I don't know whether you've had this experience, but you just notice how everyone else is just completely lost in thought, right? You just have the sudden experience that no one is actually, or doesn't seem like anyone's really present here. And just maybe for a few moments, it strikes you with a depth of realization, and it might be you're walking along a crowded pavement and someone bumps into you because they just didn't see you, or they don't make way, or they're walking with their phone, but it doesn't have to be that dramatic, does it? We just know from our own experience that it's very hard to be anything but lost in thought. And what is thought? It's a difficult question, but it's running stories, narratives that by definition aren't in the present moment. They're either about the past or the future, right? You might be examining something that's occurring now, but you're thinking about how it's going to play out. Again, in meditation, this is what we observe immediately in our own experience, that as soon as you try to just be paying attention to the transient and ever-changing experiences, at some point you realize, oh, I was planning dinner, or I was, so in the same way, I like your question though. Sorry, I'll get back to it now. I like your question because you're framing it in the everyday, and the whole point of, for example, meditational practice is not to stop thinking, right? Because you can't, right? People will report their mind quietens down. In other words, their mind's not jumping around as much. But of course, thoughts will come and pass through, just as body sensations will come and pass through, and in the everyday, of course, the world's not going to stop for us. It's not going to be still, and it's going to, So I guess the trick, if there was a trick, is treating the everyday like a meditation. So, for example, you're talking to someone and you're allegedly listening. And at some point, you realize you're actually not listening. So this is akin to, at some point, you realize I'm not paying attention to the sensation to breathing or to my mantra or whatever. At that moment of realizing that you're not listening, you're now present. Now, in the conversation, you may have to make that move 5 or 6 times. As you discover I'm off, I'm reloading to say whatever brilliant thing I've got to say, or I'm bored, or I'm cranky with them, or I'm falling in love with them. Whatever. Everyday life is a meditation if we think to be mindful. And that's the whole point of meditation, is to be in the present moment. And when we do that, I guess I'm thinking now of 30 years of therapeutic practice. I remember someone once asked me, don't you get bored people telling you all their problems? And sometimes I do, but that's my failure to actually pay attention. I've never been bored when I'm really paying attention, because people are amazing when you're really paying attention, right? So in a funny kind of way, what's boring is the repetition of my concepts that I keep applying that blocks my perception of everyday experience, right? So I guess another tip then is to notice negative emotions. Usually, not all, but usually there's some sort of representation of resistance to the nature of reality, right? So is that a quarter of an answer?
It was an excellent answer. Thank you, Dr. Chris.
Oh, that's very good, very kind.
Those blocks that we put up with our own notions or pre-notions when we're having those conversations stop us from being awe-inspired. That was very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Which leaves Colleen and Terry, who are going to be scrambling over each other to talk first.
Okay, I'll go next. As that topic's been well tended, I'll come at this from a different angle. Mainly around the time distortion and that concept. With inside my day, I find if I don't have an aha moment, I don't feel like I accomplished much.
Yeah.
I can counter that by making a list of things that I should do, and if I knock off that whole list, I feel good. It was a good day, time well spent.
Mm.
Nothing's distorted.
Mm.
So it's interesting that I have to either feel that emotion of the aha, or I have to use a list.
Yeah.
Or me to understand time
Yeah.
within inside my day. And I wonder what your thoughts are around that.
Yeah, it's very interesting, Terry. I think the let's take the aha moment, the insight. I mean, we know that those things are, generally speaking, inherently valuable. So in terms of, assessing whether you've achieved anything in the day sort of thing, that one is kind of obvious. In terms of time perception, though, it's the uniqueness of that experience that marks it out in the memory of the day, right? I think we'll be talking in the next podcast and roundtable that there's a thing called the holiday paradox, but the idea is that if you're experiencing unique things, time goes fast in the moment, but retrospectively it feels more expanded. So I think that's part of it. But the other part was the thing about your list, and they're important things to do and getting them done. And but lists are good things for many reasons. But one of the reasons they're good is that they can bring to mind all the things that I have done today. So, for example, if you don't do that and you just sort of you're driven from task to task to task to task, as often people are in work, they sort of get to the end of the day and they think nothing happened. It's like that. There's no, and it feels like they didn't achieve anything. So sometimes I actually say to people, make a list at the end of the day of what you actually did. And generally speaking, people are amazed. It's certainly almost always more than they thought they did, right? And so then retrospectively, the day seems to expand because it has more events in it, more frames per second, to use the film analogy. All right. So I think both of your things are they're additive. To have an insight stands out. It's unique, and so it slows time down retrospectively. But also having in the mind, oh yeah, these are all the things that I've done today. That also means, oh, that's been a big day. It's been productive. I mean, it's odd. We'll talk about this again next. But if you have a really boring day, there's absolutely nothing new, and you didn't have a list to check off, time drags. But when you think about it, it's like often the experience of someone in aged care is like that. Nothing's happening. The days drag. But 5 years later, they think, where did the last 5 years go? And that's because retrospectively, there's nothing akin to your list to mark it off as having any significance. Okay. That's the best I could do with that. But I think both of those things are valuable things. Yeah. Yeah. Which leaves the wonderful Colleen.
Well, I was just going to add to what you were saying. I think time and awe, it's interesting to see how it's different depending on what stage of life you're at. I mean, how children consider it differently than, somebody at our age and older. And you really start to appreciate it more.
Yeah, it's kind of curious. I hadn't thought about it in quite the way I'm about to say, but it's almost like there's a U curve, where you start really high in awe, and then as you go through life, your awe quotient drops. And maybe, and I don't think it's true for everyone, because I just mentioned the thing about aged care, but potentially as we get older, we might begin to actually experience more awe again. Now, I don't think that's inevitable. In fact, it's probably a separation of people who into those who've worked on awe and those who haven't. Right, and but I think potentially as we get older, we have the opportunity to realise what's actually important in life. We're maybe a little bit less driven by our need for status and to win and compete and so on, and it turns out, of course, that the things that are actually really enduringly valuable aren't those things. They're the awe we feel in relationship with others. They're spiritual questions. They're connecting with nature, et cetera, with all the art forms, perceiving beauty generally. So I think that especially as one becomes more conscious of one's mortality and one's impermanence, that there's a potential invitation to the awe-inspiring and to the enduringly meaningful, rather than the transient distraction of busyness and climbing the status ladder. Yeah. Now, the other little thing I think you mentioned there, Colleen, was about like children versus adults. There was something I wanted to say about that. Oh yeah, and I think this goes right back to what Chris was saying. That I think that we need to really work on this. Because obviously we're most of us are going to get quite elderly, and that means in many ways we're not going to be able to do a lot of the stuff that we might be able to go surfing or whatever it is, or rock climbing, or we won't have the energy. We might even lose our mobility. Does that mean our quality of life is going to be necessarily really poor? Even in our decline, our terminal decline, does that mean we can't experience awe and meaning and purpose? I don't think so. I think it's the work we've done here, and it won't be an accident. The romantic poet William Blake, he wrote a series of poems called The Songs of Innocence and Experience. And they were sort of a series of poems in parallel, looking at the world through innocence and looking at the world through experience, the same world. And I think this is what he was looking at, this sense in which, how do I rediscover that innocence as a grown-up? How do I rediscover that sense of awe as a person full with knowledge? In a way, I think what he was saying, that's our job. Yeah. All right. Gee, we're ending on a profound note. But guys, as always, you never disappoint me. Fantastic questions, and you are wise, as I suggested, and certainly we will catch up soon, because we've got part 4 of the Time series to discuss. So keep well, and we'll talk again soon. Thanks, guys.